Then Savitri surged out of her body's wall and stood a little span outside herself at the dim portal of the inner life. A formidable voice cried from within, "Back, creature of earth, lest tortured and torn thou die." The serpent of the threshold hissing rose, and trolls and gnomes and goblins scowled and stared, and wild beast roarings thrilled the blood with fear. And menace muttered in a dangerous tongue, unshaken, her will pressed on the rigid bars. Her being entered into the inner world.
Good morning. So I'll just review a little bit of where we are in the story. Savitri has gone out into the world to find her mate, her husband, and she found him on the edge of a forest hermitage. His name is Satyavan. And she saw and they fell in love and knew each other as their counterpart, their soulmate. She went back to the palace where to tell her father, the king Aswapati, and her mother of her choice. And there Narad, the heavenly sage, happened to be present. And in a conversation, he revealed that Satyavan would die in just 1 year. But Savitri stood by her choice. Her mother tried to dissuade her to choose someone else. But she said, no, once my heart has chosen, it cannot be changed. And so Savitri returned to the forest hermitage to live with Satyavan. And there, one sleepless night, she has this foreknowledge of his impending death, which she has not shared with Satyavan or his family there. And she's feeling this immense grief and fear of what is to come. And she hears a voice from the summits of her being telling her that she should not just weep for her loss, but that she should go within and seek for her soul, and then finding her soul to conquer death. And now, at the point we are in the story, she goes within, deep within herself, seeking for her soul in her inner being. But in that inward journey, she has to pass through these different layers of the inner consciousness. And what we heard in the introduction, this music and Mother's words, were her kind of entering into the inner being, where deep within that the soul resides. But first she has to pass through these more dangerous and difficult layers of the consciousness. So we've come to page 496, line 298. There are books here if you want to follow along. The books are here. So at least two they need there. So again, page 496, line 298. So generally what we do is we read through a canto first without stopping, each person reading a portion, and then we go back and read it again and comment on it more closely. So we're going to just finish the canto, reading through it the first time, and then we'll go back to the beginning of the canto. So Artem, would you like to begin? Line 298. Oh, okay. It's all stepped into a systemed universe. It's about almost halfway down.
All stepped into a systemed universe. Life empire was a managed continent. Its thoughts an army ranked and disciplined. Uniformed, they kept the logic of their fixed place. At the bidding of the trained centurion mind, or each stepped into a station like a star, or marched through fixed and constellated heavens, or kept its feudal rank among its peers. In the sky's unchanging cosmic hierarchy, or like a high-bred maiden with chaste eyes, forbidden to walk unveiled the public ways, she must in close secluded chambers move, her feeling in closest life or gardened path. Life was consigned to a safe level path. It dared not tempt the great and difficult hates, or claim to be neighbor to a lonely star, or skirt the danger of the precipice, or tempt the foam-curled breakers' Pelion's laugh, adventurous lyrist, dangerous amateur, or in her chamber call some flaming god, or leave the world's bounds and where no limits are. Meet with the heart's passion the adorable, or set the world ablaze with the inner fire.
Thank you. Maybe I just comment. Savitri is going into these inner realms of her consciousness, and she's passing through a realm that is being described here. So that's what's happening. Okay, Margaret.
Is an epithet in the prose of life. She must fill with color just her sanctioned space, not break out of the cabin of the idea, nor trespass into rhythms too high or vast. Even when it soared into idle air, thought's flight lost not itself in heaven's blue. It drew upon the skies a patterned flower of disciplined beauty and harmonic light. A temperate, vigilant spirit governed life. Its acts were tools of the considering thought, too cold to take fire and set the world ablaze, or the cave for reasons diplomatic moves, testing the means to a prefigured end, or the highest pitch some calm will's plan, or tragedy of some high command within, to conquer the secret treasures of the gods, or win for a masked king some glorious world, not a reflex of the spontaneous self, an index of the being and its moods, a winging of conscious spirit, a sacrament of life's communion with the still supreme, or its pure movement on the eternal's road.
Thank you. Next. Would you like to read that? Okay. Would you like to read? Okay.
Or else, for the body of some high idea, a house was built with two close-fitting bricks. Action and thought cemented made a wall of small ideals limiting the soul. Even meditation mused on a narrow seat, and worship turned to an exclusive God, to the universal in a chapel prayed, whose doors were shut against the universe, or kneeled to the bodiless impersonal, a mind shut to the cry and fire of love. A rational religion dried the heart. It planned a smooth life's acts and ethics rule, or offered a cold and flameless sacrifice. The sacred book lay on its sanctified desk, wrapped in interpretation's silken strings, a credo sealed up in its spiritual sense.
Thank you. Next.
Here was a quiet country, a fixed mind. Here life no more was all, nor passion's voice. The cry of sense had sunk into a hush. Soul was not there, nor spirit, but mind alone. Mind claimed to be the spirit and the soul. The spirit saw itself as form of mind, lost itself in the glory of the thought, a light that made invisible the sun. Into a firm and settled space she came, where all was still and all things kept their place. Each found what it had sought and knew its aim. All had a final last stability. There one stood forth who bore authority on an important brow and held a rod. Command was incarnate in his gesture and tone. Tradition's petrified wisdom carved his speech. His sentences savored the oracle.
Thank you.
Traveler or pilgrim of the inner world, fortunate art thou to reach our brilliant air, flaming with thought's supreme finality. O aspirant to the perfect way of life, here find it, rest from search, and live at peace. Ours is the home of cosmic certainty. Here is the truth. God's harmony is here. Register thy name in the book of the elite, admitted by the sanction of the few. Adopt thy station of knowledge, thy post in mind, thy ticket of order, draw in life's bureau, and praise thy fate that made thee one of ours. All here, docketed and tied, the mind can know, all schemed by law that God permits to life. This is the end, and there is no beyond. Here is the safety of the ultimate wall. Here is the clarity of the sword of light. Here is the victory of a single truth. Here burns the diamond of flawless bliss. A favorite of heaven and nature live.
Thank you.
But to the too satisfied and confident sage, Savitri replied, casting into his world sight's deep release, the heart's questioning inner voice. For here the heart spoke not only clear daylight of intellect resigned here, limiting, cold, precise. Happy are they who, in this chaos of things, this coming and going of the feet of time, can find the single truth, the eternal law. Untouched, they live by the hope and doubt and fear. Happy are men anchored on fixed belief in this uncertain and ambiguous world, or who have planted in the heart's rich soil one small grain of spiritual certitude. Happiest who stand on faith as on a rock. But I must pass, leaving the ended search. Truth's rounded outcome form, immutable, and this harmonic building of world fact. This ordered knowledge of apparent things. Here I can say, not for I seek my soul.
Thank you.
None answered in that bright, contented world, or only turned on their accustomed way, astonished to hear questioning in that air, or thoughts that could still turn to the beyond. But some murmured, passers-by from childred spheres, each by his credo judged the thought she spoke. Who then is this who knows not that the soul is a least gland of a secretion's fault, disquietening the sane governed of the mind, disordering the function of the brain, or a yearning lodged in nature's mortal house, or dream whispered in man's cave of hollow thought? Who would prolong his brief unhappy term, or plunge to living in a sea of death? But others? Nay, it is her spirit she seeks, the splendid shadow of the name of God, a formless luster from the ideal's realm, the spirit in the Holy Ghost of mind. But none has touched his limbs or seen its face. Each soul is the great Father's crucified Son. Mind is that soul's one parent, its conscious cause, the crown on which trembles a brief passing light. Mind, sole creator of the apparent world, all that is here is part of our own self. Our minds have made the world in which we live. Another with mystic and unsatisfied eyes, who loved the slain belief and mourned its death. It's there one left who seeks for a beyond. Can still the past be found? Open the gate.
Thank you.
So she fared on across her silent self. To a road she came, thronged with an ardent crowd, who sped brilliant, fire-footed, sunlight-eyed, pressing to reach the world's mysterious wall. and pass through masked doorways into outer mind, where the light comes not, nor the mystic voice. Messengers from our subliminal greatnesses, guests from the cavern of the secret soul, into dim spiritual somnolence they break, or shed wide wonder on our waking self, ideas that haunt us with a radiant tread, dreams that are hints of unborn reality, strange goddesses with deep bold magical eyes, strong wind-haired gods carrying the harps of hope, great moon-hued visions gliding through gold air, aspirations sun-dream head and star-carved limbs, emotions making common hearts sublime. And Savitri, mingling in that glorious crowd, yearning to the spiritual light they bore, longed once to hasten like them to save God's world. But she reined back the high passion in her heart. She knew that first she must discover her soul.
Thank you.
Only who save themselves can others save. In contrary sense, she faced life's riddling truth. They, carrying the light to suffering men, hurried with eager feet to the outer world. Her eyes were turned towards the eternal source. Outstretching her hands to stay the throng, she cried, "O happy company of luminous gods, reveal, who know, the road that I must tread, for surely that bright quarter is your home. To find the birthplace of the occult fire and the deep mansion of my secret soul." One answered, pointing to a silence dim on a remote extremity of sleep, in some far background of the inner world. O Savitri, from thy hidden soul we come. We are the messengers, the occult gods, who help men's drab and heavy ignorant lives to wake to beauty and the wonder of things, touching them with glory and divinity. In evil, we light the deathless flame of good and hold the torch of knowledge on ignorant roads. We are thy will and all men's will towards light.
Thank you. B?
Copy and disguise of God, who seeks the deity thou keepest hid, and livest by the truth thou hast not known. Follow the world's winding highway to its source. There in the silence few have ever reached, thou shalt see the fire burning on the bare stone, and the deep cavern of thy secret soul. Then Savitri, following the great winding road, came where it dwindled into a narrow path, trod only by rare wounded pilgrim feet. A few bright forms emerged from unknown depths and looked at her with calm, immortal eyes. There was no sound to break the brooding hush. One felt the silent nearness of the soul.
Thank you. So we'll go back now to the beginning of the canto. Page 488.
the entry into the inner countries. At first, out of the busy hum of mind, as if from a loud thronged market into a cave, by an inward moment's magic she had come. A stark, hushed emptiness became herself. Her mind, unvisited by the voice of thought, stared at a void, deep's dumb infinity. Her heights receded, her depths behind her closed. All fled away from her and left her blank. But when she came back to herself of thought, once more she was a human thing on earth, a lump of matter, a house of closed sight, a mind compelled to think out ignorance, a life force pressed into a camp of works, and the material world her limiting field. Amazed like one unknowing, she sought her way out of the tangle of man's ignorant past that took the surface person for the soul.
Thank you. So following the command of the voice from the summits of her being, Savitri turns within in order to seek for her soul. So as she does this in the beginning, she's turning away from the thoughts of the mind, out of the busy hum of mind, as if from a loud, thronged market into a cave. The mother has said that sometimes when we enter into our soul, it's as if we're going deep down into a deep tunnel or cave, into a kind of a great depth of being, silent. So this is what she's beginning to experience. By an inward moment's magic, she had come. A stark, hushed emptiness became herself. She enters into this enormous silence. Her mind, unvisited by the voice of thought, stared at a void, deep's dumb infinity. It's this silent infinity of being. All fled away from her and left her blank. But then Sri Aurobindo says something interesting, that we may enter into this silence, but ultimately we come out again. It's a temporary experience. And then when we come out, like her, once more she was a human thing on earth, a lump of matter, a house of closed sight, a mind compelled to think out ignorance, a life force pressed into a camp of works, and the material world her limiting field. This is a limitation of that first experience of silence, that ultimately it recedes and we have to come out again into the outer consciousness. And then that outer consciousness is as it was before, unchanged, still ignorant, still limiting. She had come out of the thoughts of mind, this marketplace of thoughts, into a cave of silence. So that turn inward into that change that took place was a moment's magic. It was as if a kind of a little transformation came. And she had come into this silent cave of the inner being. But maybe that also, that inward moment's magic, maybe that kind of prefaces this other experience that we come out. It's like momentarily we're in that silence. It's a temporary experience from which we again emerge into the outer ignorance. So it's like we go into a trance, but we come out again. Right. Maybe that's worth reading. I'll just read that. What the voice had commanded her to do. The voice replied, "Remember why thou camest." And that's a message for all of us. Why have we come into this life, into this world? Find out thy soul, recover thy hid self in silence, seek God's meaning in thy depths. This is on 476. Then mortal nature change to the divine. So that's the secondary aspect of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. We enter into the silence, but ultimately it's in order to change the outer nature to the divine. Not just to come out again back into the ignorance and live in the ignorance. Open God's door, enter into his trance. cast thought from thee, that nimble ape of light, in his tremendous hush, stilling thy brain, his vast truth wake within, and know and see. Cast from thee sense that veils thy spirit's sight, in the enormous emptiness of thy mind, thou shalt see the Eternal's body in the world. Know him in every voice heard by thy soul. In the world's contacts, meet his single touch. All things shall fold thee into his embrace. Conquer thy heart's throbs. Let thy heart beat in God. Thy nature shall be the engine of his works. Thy voice shall house the mightiness of his word. Then shalt thou harbor my force and conquer death. Yeah, I think that's the case. We need that intention. Mother has said that finding the soul has to be a conscious choice. It's not just something that happens. You have to make the conscious choice to seek for the soul and to find it. So Savitri is seeking. She continues to seek. Amazed like one unknowing, she sought her way out of the tangle of man's ignorant past that took the surface person for the soul. So then let's continue, Arta.
Then a voice spoke that dwelt on secret heights. For man, thou seekest not for thyself alone, only if God assumed the human mind and put on mortal ignorance for its cloak, and makes himself the dwarf with triple stride. Can he help man to grow into the God? As man disguised, the cosmic greatness works and finds the mystic inaccessible gate and opens the immortal's golden door. Man, human, follows in God's human steps, accepting his darkness, thou must bring to him light. Accepting his sorrow, thou must bring to him bliss. In matter's body, find thy heavens-born soul. Then Savitri surged out of her body's wall and stood a little span outside herself and looked into her subtle being's depths, and in its heart, as in a lotus bud, divined her secret and mysterious soul.
Thank you. Let's pause. Here we're reminded that Savitri is no ordinary human being, that she is an incarnation of the Divine Mother, an incarnation of God. So the voice is telling her it's not just for yourself that you must seek your soul. For man thou seekest, not for thyself alone. And he says, only if God assumes the human mind and puts on mortal ignorance for his cloak. So God is assuming the human form, the darkness, the ignorance, the suffering of life, in order to show man the way. And then there's this allusion to some ancient Hindu myth, and makes himself the dwarf with triple stride. Can he help man to grow into the God? Now this dwarf, we have an explanation from Shraddhavan. So I'll read that. She explains this myth. Here is an allusion to a story about one of the 10 avatars of Lord Vishnu. In fact, the first avatar in a human form, but as a dwarf, a small human being, Vamana. Lord Vishnu comes to earth in this form to teach a lesson to an earthly king called Mahabali. Though Mahabali was a very good and benevolent king, a little conceit got into his head. To set this right, Vamana, dressed as a Brahmin, approached the king, who was at that time conducting a very elaborate yagna, a sacrificial ritual. For such a function, it was customary to receive visitors or guests, and especially Brahmins, to the place of yagna and to grant them any boon that they might ask for. When King Mahabali politely asked Vamana what he would accept as a gift, Vamana asked to be granted as much land as he could cover in 3 strides. The king was surprised. How much land can a small person cover in only 3 steps? He said yes without any hesitation. Then that little dwarf, who was actually Lord Vishnu in disguise, started to grow in size. With his first step, he covered the whole earth. With the second, he covered all the heavens and the other worlds. Then he turned to the king and said, "Now, where can I put my foot next?" Mahabali realized his mistake and was purified of all his pride. With all humility, he bowed before the Lord and pleaded, "Could you once again become that dwarf and put your foot on my head so that I don't have to go back on my word?" Thus, he totally surrendered to the divine. This is the story of the dwarf with triple stride. The divine disguises himself as a small, helpless, ordinary human being. But what he demands is everything, for in fact it all really belongs to him. This is what Savitri has done too, in fact. She is an emanation or projection of the Supreme Divine Mother, but she has taken on the guise of a human being. And now she is being told that in order to fulfill her mission of helping humanity to grow into its true divine self, she will have to go through the whole process of discovering her soul as a human being. So then the voice elaborates, as man disguised, the cosmic greatness works, and finds the mystic, inaccessible gate, and opens the immortal's golden door. And here, this golden door seems to refer to this supramental gate, this realization that Mother had on February 29th, 1956, where she approached this large golden doors and broke it open, and the supramental light and force descended upon the earth. And then man, human, follows in God's human steps. Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have set the example for us, as well as explained the way for us to our own spiritual realization and fulfillment. The voice tells Savitri, accepting his darkness, thou must bring to him light. Accepting his sorrow, thou must bring to him bliss. In matter's body, find thy heaven-born soul. And that line is also very pregnant, I think, with meaning. That ultimately Mother was seeking for the realization of the divine in her physical, material body. That all the being has to open to the consciousness, the awareness, the realization of the divine, the mind, the heart, the life force, and ultimately even the body has to open to that light and force. But then Savitri surged out of her body's wall. So she actually goes out of the physical consciousness into this inner consciousness, into the inner countries, as the title of the Canto says, and stood a little span outside herself and looked into her subtle being's depth. The subtle being, it's different than the physical, material being, but it's still a kind of a substance. And in its heart, as in a lotus bud, divined her secret and mysterious soul. Here, divined means she perceives through like an intuition or insight. She has some intimation of the presence of the soul, but she hasn't really found it yet. She just knows that it's there. Right. Hmm. Right. And that light from the sun comes into the soul of Auroville. But yes, ultimately into the physical soil of the earth from all the countries. Yeah, and that's goes back to that, in matter's body, find thy heaven-born soul. The physical also has to realize it. Yeah, we have to experience and know these dark and suffering aspects of our consciousness. But into that awareness of these aspects of our being, we have to call in the light and the transforming force into that to change them. Not to accept them forever to be the same, but accept them in order that we can call into them this force and light. Not deny them. And if we deny them and push them away from ourselves, even enter into a silent peace or void, then they are left untransformed. They don't share in that light. So that's why we have to accept and call into them the transforming force. So let's continue. Margaret?
At the dim portal of the inner life that bars out from our depths the body's mind and all that lives but by the body's breath, she knocked and pressed against the ebony gate. The living portal groaned with sullen hinge. Heavenly, reluctant, it complained in it against the tyranny of the Spirit's touch. A formidable voice cried from within, "Back, creature of earth, lest tortured and thorn thou die." A dreadful murmur rose like a dim sea. The serpent of the threshold hissing rose, a fatal guardian hood with monstrous coils. The hounds of darkness growled with jaws agape, and trolls and gnomes and goblins scolded and stared, and wild beasts roaring thrilled the blood with fear, and menace muttered in a dangerous tongue. Unshaken her will pressed on the rigid bars. The gate swung wide with a protesting jar. The opponent powers withdrew their dreadful guard. Her being entered into the inner worlds.
Thank you. This part reminds us that this inner being is a vast realm. Like the title of the canto says, the entry into the inner countries. Here they're described as countries, the realms of being. We're normally just aware of our outer being and the outer world, the outer physical world. But within, there are all these subtle worlds. Earlier in the book, Aswapati has traveled through these worlds. In the book, The Traveler of the Worlds, he has gone through all of these different worlds, and they were described in great detail. Now, Savitri is entering first into this realm, or these realms of the inner consciousness. And the entry is at first difficult. It's not just an easy passage. So she knocked and pressed against the ebony gate, and the living portal, that entryway, groaned with sullen hinge. Heavily reluctant, it complained, inert, against the tyranny of the Spirit's touch. A formidable voice cried from within. Back, creature of earth, lest tortured and torn thou die. At the start of the session, there was that beautiful music describing this entry and these sounds and this voice from within. The serpent of the threshold hissing rose, a fatal guardian hood with monstrous coils. The hounds of darkness growled with jaws agape, and trolls and gnomes and goblins scowled and stared, and wild beast roarings thrilled the blood with fear, and menace muttered in a dangerous tongue. So at the entryway, guarding it, are all these maybe guardians but dark forces perhaps that want to keep out the light, keep out the spiritual consciousness from those realms. But this is just one layer. It's a kind of a surface layer covering the deeper aspects of the inner worlds. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that journey is to the soul, to the truth, is a perilous one. It's not so easygoing. But unshaken, her will pressed on the rigid bars. The gate swung wide with a protesting jar. The opponent powers withdrew their dreadful guard, and her being entered into the inner worlds. Okay, next.
In a narrow passage, the subconscious gate, she breathed with difficulty and pain and strove to find the inner self, concealed in sense. Into a dense of subtle matter packed, a cavity filled with a blind mass of power, an opposition of misleading gleams, a heavy barrier of unseeing sight. She forced her way through body to the soul. Across a perilous borderline she passed, where life dips into the subconscious dusk, or struggles from matter into chaos of mind, a swarm with elemental entities, and fluttering shapes of vague, half-bodied thought, and crude beginnings of incontinent force. At first, a difficult narrowness was there, a press of uncertain powers and drifting wills, for all was there, but nothing in its place. At times an opening came, a door was forced. She crossed through spaces of a secret self and trod in passages of inner time.
Thank you. So we see that this first layer of the inner consciousness in which she's entering is into the subconscious. There's the realms of the inner consciousness range from matter up into pure spirit. In between, there is this subconscious layer. There's a subtle physical layer. There's the vital life force layer. There are the emotions, the mind, the higher spiritual mind levels, reaching all the way up to the pure spirit. All these realms, these worlds are within us. But as she enters, she's entering into that layer just between inconscient matter and life, the life force. So that first realm is this subconscious. And there everything is confused, out of place. She breathed with difficulty and pain and strove to find the inner self concealed in sense, into a dense of subtle matter packed, a cavity filled with a blind mass of power, an opposition of misleading gleams. This reminds us of the intermediate zone that Sri Aurobindo has warned about when entering into the inner consciousness. There are these misleading gleams of light that can lead us astray. We sense some knowledge or some intuition comes to us, or some voice may speak, but they're not coming from a place of truth or knowledge. They're misleading, and they can lead the seeker astray. A heavy barrier of unseeing sight. So through that confusion, she forced her way through body to the soul. Across a perilous borderline she crossed. Huh? Hmm. 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 Well, I just went through this thing for the last month I've been going through. But yeah, I think, I feel that it is something of this, let's say, body consciousness or whatever, that one is kind of entering into that because you're just totally identified with, the body and just, breathing and coughing and whatever it is and just trying to, so you're just totally identified with that. And yet it can also be kind of an opportunity to call into that level of being, the light, the divine. So it can be, I think, also a kind of a transformative kind of experience where you're joining, the body with the spirit. Somehow, you feel a kind of purification that comes through that whole process. So here's this borderline she passed where life dips into the subconscious dusk or struggles from matter into chaos of mind, a swarm with elemental entities. So these elemental entities are these little beings of this kind of subconscious layer of the being, these trolls and gnomes and goblins which were scowling and staring at her as she was pressing on the gates. So when we enter into the inner consciousness, we may enter into this realm of these elemental entities swarming around, all in a kind of a confusion. That's an experience one can have. And fluttering shapes of vague, half-bodied thought, and crude beginnings of incontinent force. Incontinent here, having little or no control, just a kind of a chaotic force. At first, a difficult narrowness was there, a press of uncertain powers and drifting wills. For all was there, but nothing in its place. And then in that confusion, at times an opening came. A door was forced, and she crossed through spaces of a secret self and trod in passages of inner time. I think perhaps we'll stop there for today.
perilous borderline she passed, where life dips into the subconscious dusk. All struggles from matter into chaos of mind. A swarm with mental entities and fluttering shapes of vague half-bodied thought and crude beginnings of incontinent force. This state now threatened. Thus she pushed from her.
Thanks to Sri Aurobindo.